pe- people coming in. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Patricia Reedy, and I'm with Partners Resource Network. I'll be watching the chat too. If you have any technical problems or issues, then please post it in the chat so that we can make sure we reach out to you and get that taken care of. It is exactly 12 o'clock. So as people come in, we'll make sure that they get in and get what they need. I am Patricia Reedy. I work with Partners Resource Network, the Parent Training and Information Center for the state of Texas. And we are grant funded under the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. We serve parents and families with disabilities aged 0 to 26. That grant funding means that all our services are free. We're joined today by Consolidated Planning. Ms. Michelle Morris is going to take over and moderate and introduce for us now. Good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Patricia, for having us and sharing us with your families. I'll go over kind of the housekeeping rules of the road today. If you've not been to one of our webinars, you're in for a treat. If you've been with us before, you might have heard these things. Since we're in webinar mode, we cannot see you or hear you, but you are welcome to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat box or in the Q&A. We're going to get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. This is being recorded. This webinar is being recorded, and we will email you not only a link to the recording, but also the slides. And if you're listening on our podcast and you would like a copy of our slides, you can email us. The email address is contact@cpgcares.net. That's contact@cpgcares.net. And we would happily email you the slides for today's webinar. So Consolidated Planning Group is a special needs financial planning firm located in Houston. We serve all of Texas and across the United States. Today, we would like to welcome to our webinar series Mike Day and Ann Hughes. We're going to be talking about divorce and how things are different when you have a loved one with some sort of an intellectual or developmental difference, and how you can help prepare for them in the divorce. So I won't talk anymore because I'd much rather hear the important information that Ann and Mike have to share with us.
Hi, Ann Hughes. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. And I will share with you these slides, and Mike will prompt me when it's ready to go. So
yeah, thank you, Mary Ann.
And so I am a certified divorce coach, as Michelle mentioned. I am also a mom of 2 children on the autism spectrum, and became a certified divorce coach to help others in this same position. And I guess Mike will introduce himself. You want to do so quickly now, I guess, in terms of what you do?
Yes, my name is Mike Day. I'm a attorney in Houston, Texas. I primarily practice family law. I'm board certified in family law, and I have a special place in my heart for families with children with special needs. This is a big part of my practice. I have a lot of experience working on these cases, and there can be some nuances, and I'm honored and happy to share my time with you all. And thank you very much to Partners Resource Network for having us speak, as well as to the Consolidated Planning Group for making all of this happen. Thank you very, very much.
Okay. All right. So I want to share with you some keys to success in getting through divorce and advocating for your children with disabilities when you're faced with that challenge. And my contact information, which will be in the chat as well, but for those of you on podcast, my website is specialfamilytransitions.com, and my email is maryann@specialfamilytransitions.com. So I welcome you to reach out if you have anything that I can help you with after this event. So most likely, if you're on this webinar today or listening, you're facing divorce, thinking about divorce, or maybe you've been divorced and trying to figure out how to make the relationship better, or look at how to improve the situation with your children for support them, and also perhaps working with your ex. And so a lot of times we're just overwhelmed and don't know where to start. I know that was a case for me when I was approached with divorce after 21 years of marriage. You don't know what the future is going to hold, how you're going to get through this, support your kids, what the future will look like for them. And the goal here, as it was for myself, was to get the best result for myself and for my family. And so happy to help you get there and share some tips that help me and things that I've learned along the way to make your future easier and brighter as well. So as I mentioned, I've got 2 kids on the autism spectrum, now young adults. And really this divorce wasn't about me. I made it about them and making sure that I got through it to set a good example for them and to support them and what they needed during the divorce as well as in the future. It took me a long time to get there. And so I am sharing with you some tips so that you too don't have to spend as much time and money as I had to do. But the good news is I did receive a great result from my family and now working to help others get there as well. And so taking all my knowledge that I gained through my process, I formed Special Family Transitions and do consulting and support for families that need support and need help. And as part of the process, went through law person development, became certified as a divorce, transition, and recovery coach to help people before, during, and after divorce. It doesn't end when you get that piece of paper saying you're divorced. There's all things you need to do afterwards as well to make sure things continue to go smoothly. But a lot of the overwhelm does come in the first phase for sure. And so happy to give some hints for that. And so in putting all my knowledge together, I just want to share this as well, that I put together like a little mini course for people to kind of learn the tips that I'm going to share a lot of them with you today, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But there's a course that they'll send the link to, or reach out to me if you don't have it, can't see the slides, for you to, as a special needs moms, more focused for the mothers, how to advocate and support your child in divorce so that you get the best outcome possible for your children and for yourself. A lot of times we forget that this divorce is not just about the children. We've got to grow and develop and make sure that we get what we need for all of us as well. And so my framework that I developed through my experience is called RISE, and where each letter stands for different things you want to think about and consider as you're going through the process to come up with a good result for yourself and for your family. And I'll go through each of these in turn. And so R is for recognize and resolve. You want to get in the right mindset. You need to understand and accept where you are right now. A lot of times maybe we don't want to be divorced or didn't expect it, but we have to make sure that we're doing all that we can so that we can get the best result for our family and figure out how to connect with the resources that we need and get through the process. So a lot of times we may not have a hard time accepting it, and that's part of the grief cycle, which I talk about more in, later. But a lot of times we don't want to, and we might find not just us, but also the other party may not be in the same place or even fully accept the child's disability. So it's not just a divorce cycle, it's also accepting a diagnosis or any kind of change or loss in your life. You're going to go through these kind of steps. So know that these are normal and it's okay. And sometimes it takes people different times and different types of support to get through them. But basically the grief cycle is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance finally. And that's when we can make the most progress when we're at that phase and do things that are going to make a difference. And we've got to resolve that we're going to work our hardest to get the best outcome we can. Divorce is a finite process. It may seem like it takes forever, but it will end. And so we want to make sure that between now and then, we do what needs to be done to advocate for ourselves and for our kids. And for I, identify and investigate. And so what that means is you need to understand what it is you have and what it is you need to address your child's needs now and in the future. And so part of that is identifying not just the financial needs, which people like Michelle and Consolidate can help you with, but also identify what your child's needs are, what they're going to need, the program services, and to figure out how much those will cost. So you can kind of have that as part of the discussion in your divorce and in your long-term planning with your planning team and with your soon-to-be ex-spouse, because this is going to be a long-term situation for y'all. Even after the divorce, you'll want to find ways to work together and to meet your child's needs. And so my recommendation is by putting the child first and working together to meet those needs, you're going to have a much easier, smoother process. And so S stands for self-care, support, secure your team, and special needs considerations. So there's a lot to consider here. But the first thing to know is that, speaking from my perspective as a special needs mom, the last person we want to take care of is ourselves. But know that you got to take care of yourself first so that you can be there for your kids and be a good example for them and make better decisions in your divorce. And because you want to be your best self, not just for your kids, but also as you meet with professionals who can help you throughout the process. And so it's hard to do it alone, for sure. And so there's, reach out to family, friends, professionals, and different groups that can support you. I know when I first went through, I asked Brandon to consolidate planning group at a resource fair. And so they kind of helped me get started as to what my first steps need to be. So definitely, get out there. There's also Facebook groups and organizations such as this putting this on that can help you and guide you in terms of where to connect with professionals who can help you. So there's not just the legal side, we've got that represented today, in financial with Michelle and myself as a divorce coach, but also look to mental health professionals that can maybe help you and your children make the best of the situation as well. And so there's a lot of special needs considerations that do make this kind of divorce different than a regular divorce. And Mike's going to go over a lot of the legal aspects of it, but just know that there's a lot of things to consider, such as setting up trusts. And so these will involve a different kind of legal professional as well, like an estate planning attorney. First party trust, third party trust, guardianships, ongoing child support, planning for the child's future, life insurance. So these are all things that we want to think about, and Consolidate can help discuss a lot of these as well as you go forward. And so for E, I've got express, execute, and embrace. So we want to make sure that we're expressing ourselves in a positive way. I know sometimes we get wrapped up in the emotion of divorce, but that's not really going to help our situation. So there's a framework called BIF, in case you've heard of that. It stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And that's the way ideally your communication should be with your soon-to-be ex-spouse and also with professionals that you work with. And that way things will flow a lot more smoothly for everyone involved. And it can be overwhelming. So just kind of divide up, take one step at a time when you're going through the process, and set timelines, work with your team to get where you need to be. So you don't have to do it all alone, all by yourself. So definitely reach out to your team to help you. We're there to get you through this. I know that divorce is not the end, it's actually a beginning. I never thought several years ago when I was facing divorce that I'd be starting my own business and helping others. But so you never know what life has in store for you. And so definitely get through what you can, but know that after this, there's so much open for you and for your children. And so I'd like to also let you know about an event I've got coming up. I know I kind of went through this rather quickly because I want to leave time for questions and for Mike to go over a lot of the detail for the legal aspects. But I'm also doing another webinar next week, March 15th at 1 p.m. Central, and that's going to be in the chat. And it's been a whole hour talking about different ways to advocate for your children in divorce when you've got a special needs divorce that you're facing. But you can also find lots of information on my Facebook page, Special Family Transitions. I've got YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok that somebody found me on today. But lots of information that you can refer to, some videos, and then, of course, the Consolidated Planning Group website and podcast will have some of the past information sessions that we've done together as well. I do also have a private Facebook group for you all who want to maybe have more private conversations, and that's called Divorce Journey Support for Moms of Children with Autism and Special Needs. So I invite you to join that as well. So look forward to helping you, and know that there's so many things you can do to help your family get through this process. I also want to share another resource with you. I was on a project last year where I helped to develop some webinars that are also on YouTube. They're not on my personal one, but it was a group called Lone Star Lend. And so if you search Lone Star Lend and divorce, you'll have that information. And it's mental health professionals who are sharing ways to support your neurodiverse child yourself during divorce. So definitely check out those resources.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Again, Marianne's website is at specialfamilytransitions.com. Her email is marianne@specialfamilytransitions.com. And you could put any questions that you have for her, either in the chat box or the Q&A. And now Mike is up. Mike, if you could take over and tell us what parents need to know on the legal side of things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My name's Mike Day. I'm an attorney in Houston, and I primarily practice family law, and I have a special emphasis on cases involving children with special needs. I can be reached at mike@jeffdiamondlaw.com. And then I also have my cell phone number posted at the next slide. I'd appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, guys, how does a child's disability impact a divorce? Well, it can affect a divorce in a lot of different ways. One of the factors can be in the property division. In Texas, we have something called a just and right division, which does not mean fair, but it's not necessarily a fair thing. It's what the courts call a just and right division. And sometimes what that means for practical purposes is a disproportionate division. So, different judges and different courts in different parts of the state all have their rules of thumb. But as a general proposition, certainly at least in Harris County and the greater Houston area, courts are going to look at pretty close to a 50-50 split. However, if one parent, and it's usually the mom, not always, but usually, takes care of the child primarily, and that child has special needs, well, then that can change those percentages. The other way that it can impact is that the amount of child support. So in Texas, you have something called the guidelines, which sounds very definitive. And basically it is, you apply a certain percentage to net resources, which is a really long definition, but at the end of the day, it's basically what someone's making after taxes and union dues, but not necessarily before retirement contributions and that sort of thing. And so if you have, let's say, 2 children, that will be 25%. If you have 3 children, that will be 30. If you have 1 child, it'll be 20%. And that caps off at the max. And that's around $9,200 a month after taxes, right? But so you're looking at, if you have 1 child, you're presumed to get 20% of that, okay? However, if you have a child who is either going to be adjudicated an adult disabled child, which is a very unique and special statutory standard, or let's say maybe the child's not old enough yet for that type of determination, but the child is, let's say, much younger and on the spectrum, it can be used as a factor to get above guideline child support. And so this is very important. So instead of just going in with 20%, you can say, well, judge, I need more than that for XYZ reasons. And you can even go above the cap. So if you have a high wage earner, you are not necessarily stuck at that 9,200. Now you can look beyond that. And in order to do that, you have to look at the child's proven needs, okay? But whether you're above or below the cap, at the end of the day, the analysis is basically the same. what are the child's needs, quantify that in terms of a monthly number, and then work backwards from that to see if the child support guideline framework is going to be appropriate for that. Another factor, and this is one of the typically one of the most contentious things in a divorce involving a child with special needs, is whether or not the parent taking care of the child will receive child support after the child turns 18. All right, so that's really important, because normally, if you have a family going through a divorce, that obligation
Sorry, Mike, you froze for a minute. Can you?
continues, and after the child turns 18, once you get the statutory definition. And there are a lot of nuances that go along with that, and we'll get into that later on. But just make a note to yourself that if you're looking to make sure that your child is eligible for governmental benefits, that child support payment is going to need to go into a very
Specifically,
specialized, special type of trust. And so another factor, if you have a divorce, or even if the parents aren't married, right, or the parents are already divorced, and maybe the divorce decree didn't account for how much time a parent has with a child with special needs. A lot of times you have a presumption of something called the standard possession order, and with elections that comes out to roughly 42% of the year, first, third, and fifth weekends. So, and in fact, every other weekend, more or less, and then some special time during the holidays, where the parents will alternate Christmas and Thanksgivings and spring breaks, and then an extended period of time in the summer. However, if you have a family law matter involving a child with special needs, two things. One, you don't necessarily default to the standard possession order. I see I'll get to the question here in just a second, but thank you for posting that. I'll address that here in just a second. So when you're dealing, family law, there's a lot of statutory presumptions, a lot of fast thinking. If you're familiar with the book, Fast Thinking and Slow Thinking. So, there's a lot of fast thinking, and a lot of people just don't honestly have a lot of professional experience with cases involving children with special needs. So a lot of the special considerations for children with special needs kind of goes against sort of the standard rules of thumb. There's also the potential for greater spousal maintenance. Texas does not have a alimony or quote unquote alimony statute. It's not like California or New York. What Texas has is something called spousal maintenance, which is governed by a special provision in the Texas Family Code. And so if one parent, typically a mom, not always, but typically, is taking care of a child with special needs, then they could be eligible for spousal maintenance. And that is something that takes into account the reasonable minimal needs of the caregiver. So it's not about lifestyle. And for that matter, child support's not about lifestyle either. It's about the needs of the child, not lifestyle. One of the areas where I see a lot of people kind of stub their toes in family law proceedings is sometimes they're advised that there's too much money in the estate for spousal maintenance, right? And a lot of lawyers think that, well, if there's north of $200,000-$300,000 in the estate, if one parent is getting half of that or more, then they're not going to be eligible for spousal maintenance. And I will tell you that that's not exactly true. There are, in particular, the last year or two, there have been a couple of cases that have come out, both in the East Texas appellate courts, I believe it was the Texarkana court, but it might have been Tyler. I can't remember. But there was a case where a woman was awarded nearly $750,000 in a divorce, and she was still eligible for spousal maintenance. And that's the in that case involved the husband who owned a very successful antiques dealership business. And so and that's something else to remember, is that if you're going through a divorce and one or both of the spouses are self-employed or work for a small business that they either own an ownership interest in, or they're friends with the people that own the business, or maybe it's a family business and their parents own the business, just know that that makes the divorce a lot more complicated from a general proposition. It's just going to be harder. It's not like you're just getting paid by Exxon and you know what people are making. There can be a lot more nuances. And lastly, the need for child support to go into a trust. And with respect to the question about back child support, so I don't practice governmental benefits law. I can't tell you if that's going to implicate your ability to qualify or for your child to qualify for governmental benefits. But
Mike, that's
uh,
something that we cover a
that's
lot.
right.
We help people make sure that they can keep those benefits. So that's something that we help with a lot. And yes, back child support, actually all child support beyond age 18 needs to go into a first party special needs trust.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle. And is that true of child support, regardless of when it's, is that true? Is it, you look at it from like an accrual versus a cash method, right? So if you have child support that was owed for when the child was 16, 17, then the child turns 18, is that child support that was owed when the child was 16 and 17, does that need to go into a trust as well, just to be safe? Or
I would say, just to be safe, yes, although I truly don't 100% know the answer to that. That's a little bit more nuanced than I get. But you want to keep things separate and safe, and it's better just to go ahead and do it.
right. That's right. And that's probably a real big takeaway about all of litigation, but this is especially true family law litigation and family law litigation involving children with special needs, is that if you can reach an agreement with the other parent, the world is a little bit your oyster in that respect, right? I mean, you can compel a court to accept settlements that they might not otherwise do, or results that the judge likes or would entertain if there was a trial. So a good lawyer will always try and advocate for the settlement process. Some cases just can't settle for any number of reasons, whether that's because there's a legal dispute about, like, for example, whether or not the child's disabled or not, or if maybe one of the parents has an issue with their personality. You see, I'm not a doctor, right? But I mean, just from my perspective, it seems like personality disorders are becoming, they're just becoming a bigger deal. I don't know if it's accurate to say more common or not, but they certainly make themselves known more prominently than maybe they were a while ago, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so, in those situations, it's really hard to get a fair settlement. But let's go. Thank you, Marianne, for putting it on this slide. This is sort of where everything hinges on, to a large extent, because even if the child is too young for this determination, eventually, they're going to hit the age 18, right? And then you have to determine whether or not the child is a quote unquote adult disabled child for purposes of the Texas Family Code. And this lays out that statutory criteria, which is that the child, whether institutionalized or not, requires substantial care and personal supervision because of a mental or physical disability, and will not be capable of self-support. And the disability exists, or the cause of the disability is known to exist, on or before the 18th birthday of the child. So it's important, the child doesn't necessarily have to be in a residential facility to be found to be an adult disabled child. Um, Second of all, this is not just for child support, right? There's an intellectually honest debate about to what extent the family courts can still address issues relating to children who are adult disabled children. At a minimum, they can address possession and access. So remember when I was saying about the first, third, and fifth weekends, effectively every other weekend, and how people just kind of default to that. Well, like I said, normally that ends once the child turns 18. But under this statute, if you have this finding, then you can still address possession and access issues going forward. There's an even bigger debate about whether or not the court has the ability to adjudicate what we call rights and duties, and to the extent they get to address those rights and duties. And that's sort of beyond the scope of the sort of high overview presentation, but just know that that's a unresolved question. Mary Ann, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, what if it's too soon to tell? What if the child's under 18? Well, it can still be a factor for not only above guideline child support, whether you're above or below that monthly cap, but it can also be a factor for possession and access and rights and duties, in particular, the ability to make decisions about the child's medical care, because sometimes you have a parent who is, they're not very plugged in, they're not very in tune with what their child needs. And sometimes you have disagreements because one parent just wants to punish the other parent. Those are really heartbreaking cases, but they do happen. And so those are just things to be mindful of, even if the child is not above the age of 18. Mary Ann, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so how is the amount of support determined? All right. The court has to determine the special consideration to, and Mary Ann, go to the next slide. Okay. All of this, which is to say any existing or future needs of the adult child. Now, this is really interesting because this is where people also get into hotly contested litigation. What are the future needs of the adult child at the time of trial, right? Are you going to have something that's sort of akin to a life care plan, like you would have in a personal injury lawsuit, where you're laying out both the type of care that is required based on the medical needs or the other needs of the child, as well as the cost of that care? Another factor is whether or not the parent pays for or will pay for the care or supervision of the child, or if one parent will provide a lot of that supervision themselves. Again, the child does not have to be in a residential placement in order to qualify for this statute. And so one of the things that the court can consider is if one of the parents who's asking for child support is in fact providing a lot of the care for the child themselves. Another inquiry is the financial resources available to both parents for the support, care, and supervision of the adult child. One of the areas where this is really interesting is that if someone's already divorced, right? Someone's already divorced, and then that wage earning spouse or that higher wage earning spouse goes out and gets a really successful business deal, right? It's no longer community property, right? The divorce has already happened. However, and again, when you have somebody who is self-employed or who works for a family business, these issues become a lot more complicated to litigate. But just know that those inquiries are very important to make when you have a family law matter involving a child with special needs. And lastly, any other financial resources or other resources available. And so sometimes people will say, well, you know what, I want an offset for those governmental benefits, right? And people are still arguing about whether or not people should be entitled to offsets, or if they are, to what extent. So that's just something else to be mindful of. Mary Ann, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so possession and access. All right. Now, this is one of the interesting wrinkles here, because this is one of the few times where probate court and family court are going to have something called concurrent jurisdiction. And that is just a fancy way of saying you don't have just one court figuring things out. You could have another court, right? And so in Harris County, you have a whole lot of family courts. Like there are like, I think a dozen. In Harris County, there are only 4 probate courts. And generally speaking, the probate courts, they do a fantastic job. But one of the things that they don't really like to do necessarily is resolve family law issues, right? There's a reason why they became probate judges and not family court judges, right? And so sometimes the probate court, someone will want to litigate this in probate court, especially if, let's say, there's a co-guardianship, right? And you say, well, hold on, stop, wait, let's try and have the family court weigh in on this. And again, this is sort of a high level analysis, but just know that there are nuanced questions here. All right. And that if God forbid, you're in a situation where you're actually having to litigate one of these family law matters, just know that, think of this presentation as a guide as to the questions that you might have for your current attorney. And I see that we have a question here. How long can spousal maintenance be expected? Okay. So normally spousal maintenance defaults to a scheme, or I say scheme, it's not like a scheme, but just a framework where you've been married for so many years, you're going to get spousal maintenance for so many years. But one of the really interesting things about spousal maintenance when a parent is taking care of an adult disabled child is that spousal maintenance could potentially be indefinite for as long as you're caring for the spousal maintenance child. I mean, for the child with special needs. How do you make the transition from getting paid child support when under 18 to a special needs trust after age 18? You have to file a motion to modify in the court that is hearing that heard the child support matter. So you have to go back to family court or the district court or county court, whatever court exercised jurisdiction over that original divorce, unless of course you've moved, and that presents another sort of nuanced question, right? But just be mindful of the fact that the court could change if the child has lived in a different county for more than 6 months. Divorced already, but having to go to court for modifications and enforcement. My ex had assets during the divorce and will most likely do so again. Is there anything that can be done? Well, that's what you call a question that is very nuanced, and I'll give you a very stereotypical lawyer answer. It depends. And I mean, this is something that I've worked with in the past. I represented the estate of a husband. So a husband and wife got divorced. Husband passes away. Wife claimed that husband fraudulently induced the divorce settlement, right? So she had to sue the estate. And really where that mattered was that she was arguing with the adult children of his first marriage, right? And so she was trying to get the divorce settlement set aside, claiming he didn't disclose all of the assets, and filed something that's called a bill of review, which those are very tricky. I mean, I've done a couple of them. I can tell you in that particular bill of review where I was representing the estate, it was not meritorious, and I ultimately obtained and collected on a judgment for attorney's fees over $33,000, and got conditional appellate fees for almost $100,000, tax, title, and license. So this woman wanted to continue to fight, she'd have to pay those fees. And so what I would tell you is that those are nuanced questions. You got to know what you're doing. Mary Ann, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. So again, this looks to sufficient income for your minimum reasonable needs. Again, this is not lifestyle, okay? And that doesn't mean that you can't necessarily get recovery for things that you might not otherwise think. For example, in Houston, there are a couple of very expensive private schools that are for children on the spectrum. And while there are no Houston cases on point on this, there are cases from other areas of Texas, Dallas in particular, that links the payment of private school tuition to the child's needs. So it can't be, I just want my kids to go to school with all the same kids at the country club, right? You got to link it to the child's needs. And if you do so, then you can get more than what you may not originally contemplate. And again, going back to the duration question, duration may be as long as the spouse is caring for the disabled child. Mary Ann, if we could please go to the next slide. Thank you, ma'am. Dispute over whether a disability exists. So we've kind of gone over the definition of an adult disabled child, although theoretically this issue could come up if someone said, well, the child's on the spectrum and the child's really young and I still need above guideline child support, right? So what happens if you have a dispute over whether or not a disability exists? Well, you could get testimony from the parents. You could get testimony from caregivers. You could get testimony from experts. But I will tell you this. There was a very recent appellate case that came out at the end of January from the Dallas Court of Appeals. That's a bit of a game changer for how people handle experts in family law matters. And so I know I might sound like a broken record when I say the word, it's a nuanced question, but it very much is. I mean, I just concluded along with a colleague of mine, we had a week-long arbitration, or actually a 6-day arbitration in College Station. And one of the issues that came up in that case was the extent of that a party, that an expert could offer testimony. And we were successful and being able to limit what that expert could testify to. And that was in large part because of this Dallas appellate decision that came out in January. So this area of the law is rapidly evolving. The legislature is contemplating legislative changes. And then again, it mattered in the case that I just tried, but one could argue that maybe that statute is of limited applicability in certain other situations, right? And so, but it's I'll tell you this much, it's very interesting because that particular part of the family code's been enacted since September 1, 2015, and hardly anybody knows about it. And there have only been 2 appellate decisions, including the January opinion about it, and just a lot of people just don't know. Mary Ann, if we go to the next slide. Language in the order. Okay, so this is really important. And there's a Austin-based attorney by the name of Keith Maples who wrote a really excellent article about this a few years ago. But you cannot just default to the tech. So first of all, what is the Texas Family Law Practice Manual? It is sort of the Bible of how to draft family court judgments in Texas. Family court judgments in Texas are notoriously long and technical. I'd wager to say that Texas might be the most complicated state when it comes to drafting family law judgments. Our divorce decrees are frequently north of 30 pages. Sometimes they're a lot longer. Sometimes you have a divorce decree that references other agreements that are not filed with the court. They can be very, very, very long. And so let's say, classic example, you go to mediation and you reach an agreement and you're going to have unreimbursed medical expenses, and that's going to be divvied up 50-50, right? But you are the parent that thinks that there should be special dietary considerations for your child, right? And so you want a broader definition of what is considered to be a medical expense, right? Because you want it to incorporate, let's say it's a gluten issue or whatever the case may be, right? If you are contractually bound in the mediated settlement agreement to limit yourself to this family law practice manual, you could put yourself in a little bit of a pickle here. And so one of the things that you need to know, and if you're currently represented by counsel, ask your lawyer, is this something that we need to be mindful of in terms of when we go to mediation? Do we, and tell your lawyer about the article by Keith Maples, because it's a very informative article. And he goes through a couple of different examples of why defaulting to the family law practice manual is problematic for the parent who is taking care of the child with special needs. And to be absolutely clear, I'm not dumping on the editors of the Texas Family Law Practice Manual. They do a tremendous service to the family bar. It's just, statistically speaking, most family law attorneys will handle maybe 1 or 2 cases in their career, a case involving a child with special needs. A lot of lawyers just don't even handle that, right? And so they just don't necessarily know, and it's too cumbersome, frankly, to expand upon that in the manual. So just be mindful of that when you're going to mediation. If we go to the next slide, please, Marianne. Okay, that's it. So here I've listed my cell number, I've listed my personal email, and I've listed my work email as well. If you have any questions, feel free, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer them. May not be able to get to them, until after spring break, but always happy to help. I know that when people have children with special needs, it's just harder. It's just harder. And my heart goes out to anyone who has to go through that with a family law litigation context, especially if it's really contested, because divorce can be nasty enough and complicated enough and heartbreaking enough. So if I can help, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Mike and Marianne, both of you, for being here today. It truly is, you need experts in this area, because there are so many things that have to be done just right. And if my cousin is an attorney and he said he could write this up for me and it's no big deal. Well, you might spend more money with someone, an expert like Mike, undoing what your cousin did for free than you would have spent in the first place just doing it correctly the first time. It's the same thing kind of with the financial side of things. And that's why we provide so many webinars to help families understand what needs to be done when it comes to planning for the financial future. So families come to us at Consolidated Planning Group for things like protection plans, meaning life insurance and income protection, lifetime care plans, transition planning, ABLE accounts, and of course the advocacy that we do, making sure that you all understand what needs to happen.
Yeah. And I just want to add one other thing, Michelle. It's so important to have an estate planning attorney that is highly competent in areas involving special needs planning, and to have a financial planner that is highly competent in special needs planning. Because in the family law arena, a lot of what I would do, or somebody like me would do, is to take their marching orders from the client with the advice that they've received from the special needs planning attorney. And so making sure that the payments get paid to the right type of trust. Sometimes you might need to have a couple of different trusts, right? Because not all trusts necessarily have to be Medicaid payback trusts. That's not something I do, but just be mindful of the fact that you also just can't go, well, I got a friend of mine from the PTA, and that person's really good at drafting wills, right? There's a place for that, but when it comes to drafting special needs trusts in a city as large as Houston, I don't know that there are more than, certainly less than 24 lawyers I know to have the requisite skill and reputation to draft these. And Houston's kind of a big place.
Yes, exactly. And we can refer families to attorneys who focus on the special needs aspects. And it's very important that you, like I said, that you work with experts. There was one slide that just gives you a link to our upcoming webinars. So if you would like to see what else we have coming up, that will be there. Thank you so much, Marianne. And, this is a list of things that should be on your radar in terms of planning. Developing a comprehensive special needs care plan, the future care cost estimates. Everybody thinks about their life and retirement. So you're thinking about yours and your spouse's retirement. But when you have a child who might need care for the rest of their life, that's like a whole nother retirement that is going to need to be paid for. And it's probably more expensive than yours. So we help people figure out where on earth that money is going to come from and how much they need to think about setting aside. We help people understand the differences between SSI and SSDI, how and when to apply and what to expect from those different programs. ABLE accounts, beneficiary designations, special needs trusts and how to fund them. We recommend that if a residential living community is in your future, that you start touring those early, learn about them, so you know what payment looks like, who they accept, where these facilities are. And we also have an upcoming webinar just on residential communities. It's kind of like a panel webinar, and it'll be quick, but it gives a ton of information. Guardianship and alternatives to guardianship and all of those nuanced issues. And then what is available for your child after high school, both educationally or maybe a transition program. We can help with all of those things. And we do often, webinars on all of those topics. So this is our team real quick, so you can put faces with the names. Allison and Jeff are the owners of the company. They have 2 special needs kids, and that's why we do what we do. We're members of the Special Needs Planning Academy, and we are National Social Security Advisors. And our last slide, this one is important. This is how you can get in touch with us and set up an appointment with us. Since everybody registered for this, we do have your email and cell phone numbers or phone numbers. So I'm going to let you know, we will call you to see if you have any additional questions, or if you would like to set up an appointment with us. We would love to hear from you. That way we won't have to call you. So just be polite if you can when we call. We're not trying to harass you. We just want to help. And again, I will mention that if you're on our podcast listening, you can get slides by emailing contact@cpgcares.net. All of our social media is down there. Our free consultation, it's just what we do is we find out about you, we answer your questions immediately. That's our first goal, is to answer your questions. Then we'll tell you a little bit about us and how we can help you and what our fees are and things like that. And then we'll decide if it would be a good idea for us to move forward together. There's no obligation. And our first goal is to help during that consultation. So that is all I have for today, except for one more thank you to everybody for being here, both presenters and attendees, and of course, Partners Resource Network for hosting us today.
Thank you so much.
So much to everybody. I'm sure appreciate you taking your time today. For our attendees, I need to launch a quick survey. If you'll take a moment to do that for us, we sure appreciate it. That is one of the ways that we keep our services free, is by letting the grant administrators know what we're doing. Once again, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day today. As a parent of a child with special needs, thank you for everything you do to help advance our community and get us information.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of your week.